Hello, my name is Keshwani. That's Keshwani, Keshwani. We are here because we want to prepare for the GMAT. We have been solving GMAT math problems out of this book here, GMAT Review, the official guide, the 13th edition. If you do not own this book already, purchase one immediately. You're going to need it. The problem that we are about to solve is the one that you will find on page number 278. Please turn to page 278. Today is our lesson number 4. We are about to solve problem number 42. Problem number 42, the question is very straightforward. The question simply is the sheet of glass, apparently we are going to have a sheet of glass. The question is it going to be enough to cover the tabletop? So we have a tabletop, we have a table, we want to cover the top of it, and the question simply is this sheet of glass that we have, is that going to cover it? That's all it is. Let's see what they tell us. In the first statement, they tell us the tabletop is 36 by 60. Of course, that by itself is not enough. Simply knowing the dimensions of the tabletop tells us nothing about the glass at all, so that by itself is not enough. AD, BCE. Since the first statement by itself is not enough, the answer cannot be A, nor can it be D. It has to be either B, C, or E. Let's look at the second one. The second statement tells us that the area of the glass is 2400 square inches or square unit, whatever it is. Again, that by itself is not going to do us anything because second statement mentions something about the glass, but it tells us nothing at all about the tabletop. So that by itself is not going to do it. Answer cannot be B. Let's put them together. If we put them together, what we find here is that 36 times 6, 6 times 6 is 36, carry 3, 18 plus 3 is 21, so this turns out to be 2160. The tabletop, the area of the tabletop is 2160, the area of the glass is 2400, and therefore since the area of the glass is more than the area of the tabletop, putting them together it should be able to cover the tabletop, and therefore putting them together the answer comes out to be C. If this is what you're thinking, if this is what you thought, then I'm sorry to have to tell you that you fell for it. It was a bit tricky. The question is a bit tricky here. This answer is not correct. When we put them together, see, this part was not necessary. This was a waste of time. This is not necessary. What we have to understand is that even though we know the area of the glass, and even though we know the dimensions of the tabletop, we know the area of the glass, but for all we know, the glass in question, the sheet of glass that is, could be, since it says that the area of the glass is 2400 square units, it could be simply 1 by 2400. In other words, it could be a thin strip of 1 inch glass, 2400 inches long. In that case, of course, it's not going to cover the tabletop. It could be even more ridiculous. It could very well be 1/10 times 24,000. A small thin strip of glass, 1/10 of an inch long and 24,000 inches long with just 1/10 of an inch wide, it's not going to cover the tabletop. It could be, for all we know, it could be 100 by 24. 100 by 24 means that it has 2 feet on one side and 100 inches on the other side, whereas our tabletop was 36 by 60. It was 3 feet by 5 feet. It was 3 by 5. If you convert, assuming that these are inches, it was 3 feet by 5 feet. This is this thin strip of glass again, which is 2 feet wide and 100 feet long. It's 100 inches long. It's not going to cover it. It's not enough. The correct answer is E. The correct answer here, correct answer is D. C is not. It may seem like we have enough information because they're giving us the dimensions of one thing, they're giving us the area of the other thing. Well, we figure you compute the area of the first guy and you can compare with the area of this guy. But if we did that, we'll fall for the trap. It was a bit tricky. Let's do the next problem, shall we? That's it, we're done with this one. The answer is E. And that was a waste of time. Calculating the area of the tabletop was a waste of time. We are not interested in the area of the tabletop and the area of the glass. We need to know the specific dimensions of both of them in order for us to conclude, in order for us to be able to conclude whether or not the sheet of glass is going to be able to cover the tabletop. Let's do the next one, number 43. In number 43, let's see what they're asking. We are told that the population of one district, P1 and P2, are populations. Excuse me just for 1 second. Excuse me. Excuse me one more time. And R1 and R2 are the number of representatives. R1 and R2 are number of representatives. Our number of representatives of town 1 and town 2. The question simply is the ratio P1 over R1 greater than P2 over R2? In other words, they're asking us, is the number of representatives per 1,000 population? Because you can obviously, they're asking us, is the number of representative per 1,000 for population for town 1 greater than or smaller than town 2? Because it doesn't matter to us whether the ratio turns out to be greater than or less than. We just have to be able to tell one way or the other, yes or no. So let's find out. Statement 1 tells us that P1 is greater than P2. Well, simply knowing that the population of town 1 is greater than population of town 2 is not going to enable us to surmise whether or not it has greater or fewer number of representative per 1,000 population, because it makes no mention of the representative. One by itself is not enough. A, D, B, C, E. Since the first statement by itself does not work, the answer cannot be A, nor can it be D. Let's look at the second one. Second statement tells us the number of representative, this is how they tell it, number of representative is greater for town 2 than for town 1. Instead of writing it this way, I'm going to write it this way so that it's consistent. So they're telling us the number of representative for town 1 is less than, is that right? Or did I write it wrong? Just give me a second here. No, yes, R2 is greater. The number of representative for town 1 is less than the number of representative town 2. Again, simply knowing the number of representative for the respective town is not going to be enough for us to make any conclusions about the ratios. We need to know the population. And number 2 makes no mention of the respective populations. It by itself is no good. Answer cannot be B. Let's put them together. If we put them together, what we find here is that P1, the first statement tells us that P1 is greater than P2. That tells us that numerator is greater for this ratio here. And here R1, we are told, is less than R2. R1 is less than R2. So the denominator is smaller. We're talking about this particular ratio here. And this guy, in town 1, we have more people. See, population of town 1 is greater than population of town 2. So in town 1, we have more people. Numerator is greater, and it has fewer representative. R1 is smaller than R2. So it has more people and yet fewer representative. Therefore, town 1 must have fewer representative per 1,000 people. It must have fewer representative per 1,000 people because it's got a greater population and fewer representative. Or the other way around, if you want to look at the town 2 we are told has a smaller population. The first statement tells us that P1 is greater than P2, which is same as saying that town 2 actually has a fewer population, and yet it has more representative. While it has fewer representative, if it has fewer population and more representative, then it must have more representative per 1,000 population. Therefore, we are able to tell which ratio is greater. It doesn't really matter to us which ratio comes out to be greater or smaller. Point is, we are able to make any inferences as to whether or not one town has more representative per 1,000 than the other town does. And that we can answer. Town 2 must have more representative per 1,000. So is this ratio greater than that? The answer is no, because this guy has a greater population but fewer representative. Putting them together is enough. Now listen, if I said something wrong now, obviously I cannot rewind myself and listen to what I just said 5 seconds ago. If I said something wrong, it doesn't really matter to us. If I came to a conclusion that the answer is yes, and it turns out that the correct answer was no, it really doesn't matter to us, because it doesn't matter to us whether the answer turns out to be yes or no. The point here is we are able to tell definitively yes or a no. At the end, as I always remind you, when they ask you, is this guy bigger, heavier than the other guy, does this cost more than that, is this town farther away than this town, for all we care, the answer could be yes or a no. We just have to be able to answer it in affirmative or negative, and here we are able to do that. You understand? Therefore the answer is C. Putting them together does the job, and the answer is C. That's all. I'll see you tomorrow, okay? Bye now.